Um, okay, so doing a bit of inking. I think this is going to come upside down for you. I got the board on the table flat, and the dog is over there barking its ass off, so I'm not going to do a ton of talking anyways, because I just want to do some inking and catch it on video. I was listening to some music, and the neighbors are trying to mow their lawn, so everybody's busy today. Anyway, this will be the inside front cover on page 1 for Into the Impossible. Like I said, I just kind of spontaneously decided to catch it on video, and hopefully I don't go out of frame. It's hard for me to tell. Oh, for fuck's sake. All right, let's just do the work. If this goes out of frame, I apologize. As always, I got the windows open right now, so there's tons of ambient noise. So, I don't know, mute it, I guess. I'm not going to talk much. Sometimes using this bigger brush, the ink will kind of push the bristles further apart towards the tip than I care for. I'll tap it out, kind of push that ink back into the to the belly of the brush. Probably could have gone a little farther in the pencils. I don't know. Definitely couldn't have hurt. These are the Pigma Microns PN. It's a little different from their normal Microns. It's not, they don't have graduated sizes. It's got a plastic tip on it, and I guess it's supposed to be more for like a writing pen. I don't know if it's really that different from like a 04 or 05 as far as like, it gives some flex. It makes a decent point for the most part. I bought a set of those from Jet Pens because it's a color set, obviously, and generally I'm pretty happy with it. The color set, it was an 8 color set, which I fully intended on using in conjunction with my watercolors. And the only thing about it is it doesn't have an orange or a yellow. It's got like a nice crimson-y kind of red, and then more of a rose red, and then there's no green either, I guess was the other one I was missing. It's got a nice blue, it's got a nice purple, it's got a dark blue, it's kind of a gray blue, sort of somewhere in between a cool gray and a royal blue. There was I want to say a 15 pin set, and that had a little more comprehensive palette to it. But for what I wanted to do, because I wanted to use it specifically to do sort of like color holds, and basically something kind of like moments when I need to color, draw in color, or moments where I want to add detail on top of the watercolor. They generally work pretty well. They're stable on the watercolor doesn't lift them back off, so they're stable on that. I've never tried them with like Copics, which I'm not a big Copic fan anyways. They're alright. I mean, I get why people use them, but it's just not my thing. I don't even know what this stuff is. Let's make it boxes. I'm totally making this shit up as I go. It's supposed to be like tools. I don't know, but it's just gibberish. Anyway, I'm just going to hold off there. One of the things that I've learned is to, if I don't know what I'm doing at any given point, like on a particular piece or object, just leave it set and come back to it. Work on something I do know what it is. That helps in two ways, because one, I'm not pondering it instead of drawing, and two, I'm continuously working. I also found that while I'm not touching on it, the subconscious kind of mulls it over, and then I'll come back to a lot of things and have a good plan of attack for it. Or find reference, which is what I ought to be doing. So I'm being super loose inking this, probably a bit more so than I ought to. It's one of those things. It's trying to find the balance of how loose is too loose versus getting the point across and having a nice energy to it, which Now I measured out this figure, double check the proportions. It still feels like the head's too freaking big. I measured it and it's right. Let's see, that's a pocket. That's supposed to be a circuit board, so I really ought to be using a pen for it. Pocket. But as far as loose versus, not loose, because I'm going to do watercolor on top of these inks, I can afford to let it be a bit looser in certain aspects. I still want to get the basic line work there because that's the foundation. And I can't use whiteout, at least not as much as I normally would if it was black and white, so I have to be a little more cognizant of the mistakes I make, try and keep them as minimal as possible. Because normally I could just blast through with whiteout and fix large sections and not worry about it. But the whiteout interferes with the watercolor adhering to the paper. So I even have to be a little bit more strategic about my corrections. I didn't warm up, and I don't feel tight. Like, I've been doing other stuff the last couple days, so I feel reasonably loose, but I don't feel like I'm being super disciplined in my attack here either. Like, I ought to be doing certain things a little bit differently, and generally knowing better than some of the shit that I'm doing. But you'll have that. Alright, let's put I'll put a spot black here, but I'm not sure I'm going to get it there. Oh, the tripod's totally in my way. Hopefully I'm not off camera too much. Alright, this. I don't know, sometimes I do stuff and I'm like, God, that's fucking awful, and then I look back at it, by the end of the work or by the end of the book even, and I'm not so hateful on it. Sometimes you just gotta let shit slide and then you come back to it with fresh eyes and it's nowhere near as bad as you thought it was. So a lot of this I do by gut, you know, just instinct, which is just, you know, instinct is heavily based on experience. So I'm not saying that I'm just throwing the brush and not hoping or not worrying about it. But I'm you know, I'm focusing. I'm trying to keep all my instincts focused in the right direction. But I'm being very loose and a little bit hateful on these wires that I stuck in. Alright, fuck this. I'm gonna have to fix it with whiteout. So alright. Knuckle. That's Band-Aid. Yeah. Alright. What about shadows? So ribs. Drop shadow. Like that. Yeah. That'll do. If you've never inked with a brush, one of the biggest differences between working with a brush and working with a marker, especially since that's what people tend to start out with these days, is that the longer you use the brush between fills, the finer the line it gets, which means you have to be a little more strategic about what you ink. So like if I'm just filling a brush, I'm not going to try and do a super fine, I'm not going to try and do it if I'm thinking about it. Sometimes I do that and I'm kicking myself afterwards because it usually blobs. But then as you get closer to running out of ink, you can either do some dry brush effects or you can make sure your point's staying and cooperating, and you can do some really fine lines like I was doing here and here. I'm talking finer than you could ever get with sometimes even a dip pen, but definitely some fine markers, which is one of the biggest reasons why I like using a brush so much. Even a large brush like this, it comes to a point, and I don't know how well you can see that or focus, but it comes to a super fine point, and those hairs, whether it's a big brush or a small brush, the hairs are all the same diameter. So, because this is a natural hair brush, so to me it doesn't really matter the size of the brush itself. In fact, I actually prefer larger brushes, like this is a size 4, because the added mass, I probably have said this before, but the added mass around the tip of the brush actually holds it still more. Like I've used like size 2s, especially Winsor & Newtons, and I feel like they just wiggle more because they don't have as much mass in diameter. So I find that I can get a more stable, clean line out of a larger brush than I can out of a smaller one. Which is why I don't switch to a smaller, trying to do all these little lines. Now, granted, it takes a little bit more strategy, like I said, but also a bit more discipline and steady hand sometimes, depending on what you're aiming to do. You got to hold the brush a little more upright. You can't, angle it as much and get the fine lines. But along with that, I also like larger brushes because it gives me a little more efficiency of line, a little more economy of movement, and that's supposed to be bigger. I don't have to refill it as often. So for me, it's just a win-win-win. Also, I don't have to switch it. This is pretty much the only brush that I use. I don't have to go and get a smaller brush for details and a larger brush for spot blacks, etc., etc. And, I really personally enjoy the look of brushed lines. You can do shit with a brush that you could never do with even a dip pen. Sometimes you'll see me do this. It's just sort of my practice golf swing. I'm figuring out what way I want lines to create form. And that is how I think of it. It's the practice golf swing. It's sort of me pre-visualizing lines that I don't have in pencils. So that's there. Form. Again, since I'm doing watercolors on top of this, I'm trying not to be too noodly with it. Alright. I'm just filling my brush a little bit. Usually if I'm not just filling in spot blacks, I will only fill it up to about half or dip it in as far as half the length of the bristles or even a third. I'm just trying to get some ink in there and then let it roll back a little bit, oftentimes holding it up. And because this time it was more because the brush was starting to dry out and I wanted to move to the face and get that done because I'm already several minutes into this video. Okay, faces take a bit more concentration. Since I'm warmed up and worked through the rest of it, got my brush rolling right, it's time to slow down a little bit. Get my lines organized. You'll see me roll the brush back and forth like this. It's changing the angle that I attack. I used to tend to be just a thrower, I guess is the term, where I would go this way, I get away from my body. I started practicing more doing towards myself and getting those nice slashy marks. And here you also notice that I tend to do the larger lines first, again because the brush is more full. And then I'll go back and do the finer details once I've worked it for a little bit. Every time you refill the brush, it repositions all the bristles. And sometimes, especially on a wider brush like this, it'll even just a little bit of repositioning. Like if these are the bristles and you want them to be all nice and lined up so it comes to a point, sometimes they get like this and fan out and you got to reposition them a bit. I also have my old washcloth here, and I'll use that to kind of either flatten out, because you can use kind of a sort of chisel tip to make a really nice fine line if you put it in line with what you're trying to draw. And you can also use that like a chisel tip on a marker, and kind of like a calligraphy pen. If you realize that's what you're doing. If you're not realizing what you're doing and you have that, you can really screw it up. Casting a shadow. I hope I'm not too far off. I was probably all kinds off camera there, wasn't I? All right. Mouth. This is where I get a little bit tricky. It's too small. Like I said, it's more natural for me to throw a line, pushing the brush away from my body, so doing these types of lines can be very awkward for me. Common problem for inking and inkers is a shaky hand, which I do get on occasion. The primary reason that I have a shaky hand is usually I'm tensing up. I start noticing that my brush lines, or my brush as a whole, is wobbling before I even get to the page. And that's a good indicator to just take a breath, reposition my body, put my feet flat on the floor, which I do have a habit of sitting on my one foot, which is not useful. I hope you can see this. I'm sorry if you can't. And just, getting myself more comfortable, making sure I'm breathing correctly. If you've ever looked into like Asian calligraphy, they're all about body position, breathing, positioning themselves in a way that is very grounded, I guess. Like their feet are on the floor flat, their body is set straight in their chair, that sort of thing. And a few years into doing inking, I saw something about that, like a documentary or something, and I tried some of that while I was inking, and it's amazing what it does, because it grounds you as you're physically grounded, in your chair, and all of that stability translates into comfort, which translates into making a much more bold line. So, jaw, here. Fuck that one. Alright. I've drawn enough ears and studied them enough that I can kind of do it on the fly now. Especially under the hair like this will be, because it's just going to be in shadow for the most part. Clouds keep rolling in and kind of back out again, so my lighting is going up and down. Alright, so that's pretty much the whole face. I don't know how long we're going here. Oh, we're at 30. Alright. Cheers, guys. Thanks.